Well, what a morning it's been. It's been a great morning of sessions, and I've got something really exciting for you. When I travel around my beloved continent of Africa, it seems like everybody knows Fred Swaniker. Fred Swaniker's on a mission to bring better leadership to Africa and the world. And he's had quite a journey from child refugee to McKinsey management consultant to educator activist. Now his life's mission is to seek out and nurture young African talent through his African Leadership Group. This is an ecosystem of organizations that develop ethical, entrepreneurial African leaders. And now, over the past 15 years, Mr. Swaniker has founded and led the African Leadership Academy, the African Leadership Network, and ALX. That's a development and talent sourcing platform. So please give a warm round of applause for Fred Swaniker.
Hello.
Hey, we can see you, Fred. How are you?
Good, thank you. Nice to see you.
Happy birthday, Fred, by the way. I understand it's your birth. You just had your birthday.
Yes, it was 2 days ago. Thank you very much.
Well, this is your Dubai birthday gift to be here with us at the Global Business Forum Africa. Let's get going then. 60% of Africa's youth population is under the age of 25, is young people, right? And the pandemic has really affected the continent's youth and their job opportunities and so on. I want you to crystal ball gaze for me and tell me what the future looks like for them and what skills they will need for this brave new future.
Thank you, Mark, for that question. So last year in the middle of the pandemic, my team and I stopped work for about a month just to really delve deep into this question. We tried to look at what the trends were saying about what the world would look like post-pandemic and how we could prepare ourselves to be ready for that new world. And our research and analysis led us to three conclusions. The first is that digital skills were going to be critical post-pandemic. The world's digitizing at a faster rate than ever before. And so as a result, we need to prepare people in areas like full stack software engineering, data science, cybersecurity, cloud computing, UX, UI design, product management. These are the skills that are going to be in massive demand. And we're seeing, almost unlimited demand for that type of capacity right now. Amazon predicts that they'll need 25 million people in cloud computing in the next decade. Salesforce.com is looking for 4 million people. So there's a huge need for digital skills. And so, we are right now training thousands of full stack software engineers, for example, as a result of that across the continent. The second area is in entrepreneurship. Because, a lot of jobs have been lost during this pandemic. And so we need to create people need to basically develop the ability to create their own jobs. Especially on the African continent where the population is growing so fast and the formal sector is just not producing enough jobs fast enough. So to be relevant in the next decade, you need to be an entrepreneur. We need to have many, many more entrepreneurs. And that's another thing that we're really developing. And so as a result, we adapted our strategy at the African Leadership University to, focus on, the entire university on entrepreneurship and digital skills. The third area that we believe will be relevant is in what we call adaptable skills, the adaptable workforce. So we're saying that aside from digital skills and entrepreneurship, we actually don't know what the jobs of the future are going to be because the world is evolving so fast. So what you need to be relevant is to have the skill you need to have is the ability to learn how to learn. Right? You don't need to be an expert in anything, but rather what you know is how to adapt yourself. You're agile, you're adaptable, and as new skills are needed, you can quickly learn them just in time to be relevant. And those are the three areas that we believe are going to be, make people successful in the next decade.
Brings me to my next question and something that I hear you talk about a lot, education. Do you think that education fundamentally in Africa needs to change? And if so, how? And take universities, for example. Are universities still relevant?
education needs a massive, massive overhaul. It is still stuck in an era where information was scarce, right? So if you think about something like universities, they were built in an era where information was scarce. If you wanted to do research, I remember when I went to college 20 years ago, you would go to the library and get this thing called microfiche, which was a tiny
I remember.
film that, exactly. And then you project that onto the screen, not even with a digital projector. That's how you did your research. Today, a child in a rural area in Africa has more access to information on their mobile phone than someone who was doing a PhD at Oxford 30 years ago, right? And universities haven't realized that. So education institutions should realize that their aim should not be to help you memorize facts and figures, because they no longer have a monopoly on that knowledge. Information is ubiquitous. The aim of institutions should be to do three things. Number one, enable you to learn how to learn, not to memorize facts and figures. Number two, to help you to become a problem solver, because problem solvers are always relevant. And then number three, to prepare you for the real world, right? So, learning through projects, through internships and things like that. Learning in the classroom should only be 10% of what you do. And so most universities, also it's important to realize that they were not developed as skills enterprises. Universities were developed as knowledge enterprises. They pride themselves in research that they do and in producing knowledge. They were never designed to develop skills. And so employers who keep saying, the universities are not producing the talent that we need, they're barking up the wrong tree, because they were never designed for that. We need a different vehicle to prepare people for the workforce and to really create these mindsets and attitudes that employers are looking for. So we need a complete overhaul. We need to apply technology a lot more. We need to think about how do we bring in the real, how do you, really break the barriers between employment and education so that there's much more integration from the beginning. And I can go on and on, but we just need a totally reinvention of the education sector.
Where does the government or governments come into this in order to shape this workforce of the future that Africa needs? How can governments shape robust education policies to prepare for tomorrow's workforce?
Well, I think governments really need to use this moment to innovate. One thing I always say is that constraints drives innovation, and Africa has always been a continent of massive constraints. We don't have a lot of time. By 2035, we're going to have the largest workforce in the world, 1 billion people who need jobs. So we need to move fast. We don't have a lot of resources. We're a poor continent. We don't have good infrastructure. We don't have good healthcare, and so forth. So when you have a lot of constraints, you need to reinvent and reimagine. You can't do things the conventional way. And COVID has just added to that pile of constraints. So now is a moment where every African country really needs to go back to the drawing board and say, what we need is not best practice. What we need is new practice. We need to reinvent. And so let's look at Estonia, for example. Wonderful example for governments to follow. They digitized the entire country. And it eliminates corruption. It allows governments to be able to deliver services much faster to their citizens. And things like education, you can reduce the costs of delivering education, make it much more, much easier to access. But that means governments need to invest in things like broadband, to make sure that people all across the continent can access the best education in the world, right, through technology. You need to change education policy to remove it from in many countries, for example, in Africa, you can't open a university unless you have 100 hectares of land.
Yes.
What does that have to do with anything? And the regulations say you need so many library books, but most people are reading in digital format today. So a complete reinvention is needed, and if we don't do this, we are doomed.
It sounds like what you're saying is policymakers, first and foremost, at the very root of this, need to prioritize investment in human capital. Is that right?
Exactly. We need to prioritize investment in human capital, because that is our real wealth as a continent. It's not our gold, our diamonds, our minerals. It's our people. We have the youngest population in the world, as you know. The average age of an African is 19 compared to 47 or 48 in Germany or Japan. The rest of the world is aging. And their economies are slowing. What they need is we have the store of the young talent. And I think a huge opportunity is to actually export our talent, right? But we can export it without the brain drain, because companies all around the world are a lot more open to hiring remote talent because of this pandemic. So what if we made that our great export industry, right? And actually invested deliberately in creating these skills that the rest of the world needs, and then we export them. But they don't leave the continent because they can work remotely. I mean, India's shown what's possible in this area. We can be the next continent to do this, but with more advanced skills and really create a huge value for the continent from our greatest resource, which is our people.
Let's go back to this issue of innovation, technology, and the internet, because this workforce of the future needs to be a digital workforce of the future. So how can we seize the opportunity in this crisis to drive innovation in Africa?
Well, as I mentioned, constraints drives innovation, and COVID has really constrained the way we do things. Before, if you wanted to meet a government minister, you would go and wait outside their office for 2 or 4 hours waiting. Now they all will meet you on Zoom. You can be much more efficient, right? We're doing things differently. We're having to reinvent, to reimagine ways of doing it. So we need to lean into this moment. And if we are actually deliberate, we could see a new wave of innovation and entrepreneurship happening on the continent right now. So it's an actually very exciting opportunity. China used this moment when they had the SARS pandemic to birth new companies like Alibaba and so forth, because they suddenly all had to go online. So why don't we can do the same in Africa, right? We need to look at digital health, digital education. How do we look at new forms of infrastructure, energy? There's so many opportunities, but innovation should be we shouldn't be simply copying best practice. Because if you think about, I always say that if you're moving on a racetrack and you're a car that is behind another one, you can't catch up to that car if you're going at the same speed. You need to go faster. You need to do things bigger and better. So what the rest of the world's standards are too low for us. If we copy the rest of the world, we'll never catch up with them. What we need is a better vehicle, a faster one. They're using a Ferrari. We need a rocket ship. That's how we're going to catch up. Otherwise, we'll always be behind. And so what we need to do is to say, actually, how can we be the most innovative continent and create new models that can then actually be really at the forefront of what the world is doing and not simply copy them. If we copy the rest of the world, we'll never catch up.
So you're in such a peculiar and amazing position, being this evangelist for all these things that you're talking about for the last decade or so. When you meet senior executives around the globe, when you meet policymakers, what do you find to be your biggest concern, and what gives you reasons to be optimistic about Africa achieving this workforce of the future that we need?
Sure. What gives me concern is the continued and possibly even increasing tendency to be protectionist and to, post-pandemic, a lot of countries are really looking inward, and they're looking at, when there was disruptions in supply chain and so forth, they're looking at as becoming less open to trade, and really, even you look at the way the rest of the world has behaved in the pandemic with vaccines. Hoarding vaccines, some countries have 5 to 10 times the number of vaccines that they need. Somehow, do they think that COVID respects borders? If the world really needed to come together with the vaccine to make sure that everyone is vaccinated, because if new variants happen in parts of Africa or Latin America, they're going to go straight back to these countries that think they've been protected. So that narrow-mindedness really is something that concerns me. And we need to really realize that we all live on one planet. But what gives me a sense for optimism is that, we have something that the rest of the world needs, which is talent. The rest of the world is really hitting the frontier of its development. Africa today is where China was, 20 or 30 years ago. So at some point, everyone has to come to Africa, and you're starting to see increasing venture capital investments on the continent. We have historically been one of the fastest growing regions of the continent in the last decade. So, I think once things settle and maybe, let's say, people come to their senses, we will begin to see, investment flowing into the continent, and we can start to really, capture this potential that exists. But also, I'm seeing better leadership on the African continent. I think, by and large, we still have a lot of, challenges in our public sector. but you are seeing better management of our macroeconomics. You are seeing more governments change hand, not at the hand of a barrel, not the barrel of a gun, but through structured processes. There's more political stability on the continent than has been 20, 30 years ago. So we have the foundations to be able to grow, and now it's just up to us as a continent to really lean into this.
One of the things I didn't mention was that Fred is on the Times list of the world's most influential people. And after hearing him, you can understand why. Fred Swaniker, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
Now, please remain seated because we've got an exciting session coming up. It's on funding tomorrow's business leaders today.